you.
Okay, thank you very much. And it is raining very heavily around the place where I live. It is Shimla in Himachal Pradesh. A lot of rains for the last almost 64 hours. So, so, dear learners, we will now take up today's session. RC Chandigarh, yeah, you are already there, and now I think, as per your indication, we can move ahead. So, as our routine is, or the custom is, that first of all we discuss briefly what we transacted yesterday. So, dear learners, yesterday we discussed a very important aspect of the short story, and we were discussing the basic elements of short story, of any short story. The very important aspect of any short story is the basic uh, structure. And the structure is primarily a form which describes its beginning, or rather, we can say the plot, and then its development, and then its climax, and then comes the end. So, during that discussion, we discussed the uh, plot, or the basis upon which a story is built, or rather, I should use the word woven. So, we know that this plot is based on certain facts, so some kind of truth. It has some kind of originality, and definitely it is developed into fantasy, into a kind of situation where some things are added from our imagination. The treatment is fancy, but definitely there remains a very concrete basis, plot, which is having definitely some meaning. So we know that while it is a fictional literature, it's definitely a fiction. That means which is artificially created, but it definitely has a base, sound footing, and that which is meaningful. So what is meant by meaningfulness is that it must have some substance, it must have some essence. So no story is without essence, without I mean, it's not without substance. That means it, at the end, it leaves some message, some satisfaction. During the discussion, we also discussed that there are a lot of contribution from different aspects, different directions to making a story. The it has specifically the characters which the creative author brings in. What are the characteristics of the characters? How they should be chosen? So we found that characters are very important because they actually take the story ahead, or they give momentum to it through dialogues, through monologue, and through their interaction, through the different aspects that the characters perform, that takes the story ahead. And they, the characters themselves are acting in such a way that they make the story true. That means through their actions, which are in the descriptive form, some kind of message is there which is given. So as we know that there is climax in the story, so in short story, it is different from other genres of creative literature. So it is definitely not a resolution of the uh, crisis there. So some crises are left unsolved, and then the reader is left to decide as to what resolution there could be. So that is the feature of the story. Then a very important aspect we discussed about the short story as its basic element which goes into making a short story, that is the atmosphere. So we have been talking about environment. We have been talking about situation, particularly situation. So situation here is described as atmosphere because we know that there are different types of short stories. There are historical short stories. There are short stories which are based on the ancient past, the medieval period, British Raj period. Then there are short stories which relates to the freedom struggle. Then there are universal form of short stories, which is the uh, formula short stories. There are love triangles. There are happy ending. There is sad ending, and so forth. What I'm trying to bring into discussion is that there is a very important aspect, which is the atmosphere. If it is about the freedom struggle, the short story is about freedom struggle, then there has to be characters. There has to be situation where the Britishers have been ruling the country. They are, putting atrocities. They are, giving a lot of certain orders or regulations are being implemented which are religiously not appropriate. So, like that, there are certain situations which are very important to give setting in time and period. The term is setting in time and period. So that means if you are trying to put in a story, developing a story, it has to be set in time and period. Means through the short story, that kind of situation is to be created, which relates or which denotes that yes, this short story is written about this particular incident, and the incident had happened at this particular point of time. So all that kind of situation is created. Say, for example, if it is about the uh, suffering of the people who have been migrating or migrated from war-torn land, so then you have to create a situation where there are a lot of hues and cries. There are people who are being, tortured, who are being, uprooted from their motherland. So their pain and sufferings are the part of the short story. They create certain mood. They create a kind of mood. Mood means the nostalgia, which is the essential part of the short story. Yesterday we also discussed, as I mentioned to you, the characters. So as the story, unfolds, the characters are added into it. But there is no need to bring in a lot of characters. Those who do not have, full-bodied appearance. Full-bodied appearance means that they should have a meaningful role. They should have meaningful importance in the short story. I mean that means they should be given certain role, and without role you cannot bring in the characters just to be there. Uh, but they should have a proper role, proper part to play in the short story. Means their character should be such that it has scope to act. And then there is another important aspect of the short story, which is the narration. So there is, we all know that narration is an art, and in short story, definitely, because story is told basically, it is narrated. Story is not, it is read. Story is not. It is something which is narrated. It is said. It is not to be watched or seen. So it has to have a specific style of presenting the plot, or treatment of the plot should be such that it seems to be that it is being narrated, it is being told. So that is the peculiarity of the narrations, how the dialects are narrated, how the story moves ahead with the help of the narration, which the different characters. are supposed to make. So all this is there, and then we also discussed the uh, mystery and complexity of life, which is an essential part of the short story. How it is presented, how a character brings in past references, and then that those references take the other part into the long trail of sense of achievement, sense of uh, losing, sense of fulfillment. So this is trivial details of life. All these are very complex details which are presented through the narratives, and the narratives takes the story ahead. So this what we discussed yesterday, dear learners. Today we have another very important topic in hand, and that topic is children's story, writing stories for children. There is a very there's a common myth that writing for children is an easy task, but uh, looking into the children's writing, it is definitely not a simple task. Rather, one should consider it very seriously. One should think that this is very essential assignment, very essential task, because it is not easy to assume how children react to a particular situation, how the character should be imagined and developed, and the story is interwoven around those characters. It's very difficult. We know that children love fantasy. They love, roaming into an imaginary world. They are not afraid of very fierce animals because they think that all those have their own entity and they will not harm the children. So children love the company of animals, birds, people, even such figures, such things which are otherwise not acceptable to an adult who looks judiciously at those things. So it is very important that all these aspects are kept in mind while writing for children. So the very first task that that is encountered by the writer who is writing for children, writing short stories for children, the very first task of the writer is to choose an appropriate theme for children. So what can be an appropriate theme? I just now mentioned. First of all, it has to be found out that what is the area, what are the things, what are the objects which the children love. So if one can decide that, then there is a little help that they can choose their theme from that particular area. But before that, we have to have a lot of study about children. What is the age of the children? Whether they are 2 to 4, 4 to 6, 6 to 8, 8 to 10, 8 to 12, then 10 to 12, then 12 to 14. What? So the appropriate theme will definitely be, taking into account what is their age group. This is very important. If they are grown-up children, means they are between 14 and 18. They have different taste. They are in different world. Their imagination level is very different. So those cannot be, catered to by the literature, which is meant for, say, 2 to 4 or 4 to 8 age group of children. So that is first point which is to be considered. Then, for all the children, it applies uniformly that while the children, the writer should, think that children's writing is very sensitive, very impressionable, and it is more imaginative. That means the children can get offended. They may not be that seasoned to think to look at things analytically. They just are very emotional. They are more imaginative, so they do like to think. They do like to imagine things which might not be real otherwise. But if it is for a case with a grown-up person, she would not imagine something which is illogical or which is unimaginative. So these two, three factors are very important, and the story writer, the author should keep these points in mind. Well, one of the boon for Indian literature as regard to the children literature or children's stories, we have very large, corpus of literature that is written specifically for children. That would mean that historically, from the very ancient period, there has been a tradition, very sound tradition of writing for children. We know we have a lot of folk tales. In the West also there are Aesop's fables, there are Gulliver's fables, Gulliver's tales, and many other tales which are there in the Western literature also. But if you look at the Indian literature, just within the Indian literature, we have a lot of folk tales, we have a lot of katha, we have a lot of stories which particularly deals with the children. So they provide us characters. And those tales have been for centuries narrated by our mothers and grandmothers, and that tradition continues. So children always have sleeping time stories which are based on fairy characters, which are based on the mythical characters, and characters like an old king. There was the, an old king who had four wives and they had seven children. Like that, they all are actually imaginative stories. Perhaps they have heard from their own mothers and grandmothers, and they have been passing it to the further generations. Apart from these, we also have classics. We have Ramayanas, Mahabharata, Panchatantra. See, particularly if you talk about the Panchatantra, Katha Sarit Sagar, Hitopdesh, and a couple of other texts which have been part of the world literature now, we know that they have lot of some of them like Panchatantra is based on the stories which has five chapters or five epochs, and each one deals with a specific set of stories where one story while ending it gives indication or birth to the coming forthcoming story. Similarly, in Katha Sarit Sagar, there are a lot of there is a basically an ocean of small stories which are interlinked, and there's a lot of scope for developing these into children's short stories, and they have been developed. In apart from these, we also have regional literature, which is also having a lot of children's, lot of folk tales, lot of children's tales, which can become a very important theme or topic for the children's short story writing. Unfortunately, today, as we are looking more and more towards the West for the children's literature, though it is improving now, but yet we have not fully, in the modern times, unfortunately, while looking at our history, we find that we have specific texts for children. In the present times, the situation is slightly different. We are looking at the children's literature which is imported from the West, and that hardly relates to our own environment, to the Indian environment, to the children who are living in the Indian environment. National Book Trust is doing its best. A couple of other agencies are also working on children's literature, specifically the literature now that is being translated from other works, from classics, from the Western literature. Anyhow, if you look at our own tradition, our own literature, which is part of the world classical literature, then we come to know that there were specific texts which have been written for the children. But let us move ahead. There are certain other reasons also, because writing for children or the children's writings do not get that way a very large market. So there is a financial issue also, which because it is kind of non-profitable area for the book publishers, so they do not do go much into this particular business. I have already mentioned to you that while deciding the themes as to what theme would be appropriate to the children, it is very important that we divide them into age groups according to their mind or the development of their persona and mind. So then we have to decide. So sometimes it is there is a group between 2 to 4 years, then 4 to 6 years, or 2 to 3 years, then 4 to 6, 7 to 10, and 10 to 15, etc. So different age group children loves different kind of literature. While very young children love to have books with a lot of pictures, illustrations, and very minimum of text. When we go to children from 4 to 6, they like small rhymes to learn, and then just to sing them, and like animal stories they would like to read. They would like to imitate animals, and some real life stories also they would like to read. So fantasies, fairy tales, of course, they are part of it. Then there comes another age group, which is 7 to 10. This is the age when the child develops his or her imaginative power. Then they like to think more about the characters which are slightly mythical. Space, they would like to fly in the space. They would want such animals which are very powerful and they can override anything and everything. Then they also love little bit of adventure. Then comes the next age group, is 10 to 15 years. Here the children have become little stable. They have developed the habit of reading, and they would like the literature or short stories which are mostly about the human behavior, human lifestyles, the adolescence cases, and the different characters which represents, which give voice to their own feelings, and adventures is also one aspect which they like. And then they would also like to participate in the imaginative activities, and also the stories of police, the uh, dacoits, the courageous stories, and to some extent they would like to read the stories where the characters have developed into persons, those who are self reliant and matured. So all this is the case with the children of different age group. So the author has to keep these things in mind. The stories must carry these themes so that the children for whom the literature is being created, they can participate in it and read and also take some message home, which is uh, which is to be given through the writings. Now, there's a small question about values about the children literature. You see, it's very typical because children are uh, traditionally they would like to be um, developing minds. So when we are talking about developing minds, we try to inculcate in them this sense of obedience, respect for elders, and also respect and the importance of truth, etc. So these value systems are traditionally there with Indian society. So when writing for children, we try to imbibe these values in our literature. So a clever short story writer brings in characters, brings in happening, brings in social events, which automatically convey these values to these children. Sometimes we have characters, those who uh, acts in such a way, or their narratives are such that they represent these values. So, in summary, I think it is very important to know that the value systems cannot be directly imbibed into the short stories for children, but it has to be put in through the characters, which are role models. They represent those values through their actions. So that is very important. Say, for example, if there is a group of children who are playing, on the on a corner of pond, and then there are a group of sadhus or saints or maybe some people who are talking to each other and then passing through that point. But suddenly, one of the children splashes in the water, and the mud and water, rises from that point, and then it puts some stains on the white dress which have been worn by the people who are passing by. But suddenly another boy comes, he say, "Hey, what are you doing? You shouldn't do that. It is staining the. It is not good to put, to do this thing, so, because it is putting stains on the clothes of these people." Then the third person, the third child, he will also come, and then they will stop this boy who is a little rude, who is of different nature. So that way, then maybe another child can come in and say, no, 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 the elders are, we have to respect them. So then the respect for elders, then not doing bad things, is a message which is given through their actions. So there can be such stories which are built on a particular kind of atmosphere, as we talked in the previous block. So there has to be an atmosphere in which the happenings which have, the implicit message, not explicit. It is very important that we try to build in implicit messages through the actions of different characters, and then those become role models for the children. So that way we can, one can try to bring in some values in one's writing. Definitely, there are certain important features of the children's short stories. What are these? Like any other short story which is written for the common readers, children's short story also have beginning, a middle, and end. So this is very common. What is little uncommon to the children's short stories is that there is sequence of stories. That means within one story, the children will not go on listening or reading a very long story. They do not want that, because after a while they get bored. They would like to have a change. So there should be a set of very small stories, and which can be interlinked, and then it can continue. Panchtantra is one of the best example, because within one chapter, it deals with several stories, and then all these stories are interlinked, because the characters keep on traveling from one story to another. So that way they sustain the interest, but at the same time, one story ends in a little while, so the child can take a break there, and then next time he or she can continue from that point. So there is a continuity, at the same time there is a break. So that means there has to be a set of stories, sequence of stories on the common theme. This is important. As I just mentioned to you, that the character continues to be there, the theme continues to be same, but but an aspect of that theme is treated in a small story. Then there has to be stories about the real events, real happenings. There are a lot of stories about the Bhopal gas tragedy, how the people got affected, how their lives were ruined, what even till today there are a lot of people who are suffering from that. So the number of stories have been developed on it, written by the different writers. The important thing is that yes, it is a fiction, definitely, and specifically the children's fiction is mostly the fantasy, or it is based on the imagination. Yet there has to be some real event, some real happening, maybe some accident, maybe some burglary, maybe some dacoity, maybe some achievement, maybe some some episode which is there in the common parlance, like that. So, I mean, sometimes even if there is a earthquake, there is a heavy rains which have caused damage. All these things can happen. So, or maybe certain stories which are based on real animals, people of different ethnic groups. There can be story on any issue, but the important factor is that the atmosphere in which these are developed, they are interwoven, but in the center space there is a real happening, real event. So we all know that children love the stories which are full of passion, pathos, courage, and suffering. Some children like the stories which have very courageous characters. They have very Some children love to see how the characters do suffer through various phases. They love those kinds of short stories, and some children love the short stories which are, based on the pathos, wails, pains, like that. So these are some features of the stories which are written for the children. One very important aspect of the children short story is the language and the technique in which they are written. A very important aspects of the writing style for the children's or the authors of children's short stories should take in mind that they are producing literature which involves young mind, lofty style, unstable minds, and also the minds which do not, which have very wavering tendency. Children do not stay at one place, at one theme, at one happening for a very long time. So the problem with most of the authors who are writing for children is that they most of the times do fail to distinguish between the adult writings and the children's writing. So here comes a point for this for consideration, that considering considering the mental state, mental condition of the children, their young minds, their wavering minds, their unstable minds, one should decide, as we are talking just while, that look at the stories of Panchtantra, look at the stories of Hitopadesha. There are small stories which have animal characters, which have human characters, which have birds, which have snakes, which have sparrows. All these characters speak. They have even characters those which are trees, flowers, sun and moon, and they have small episodes, maybe one page, two page, and then that comes to an end. And look at the fables, the fables which have roots in Greek literature. Those are also very small incidents, and they befit the children's psychology, and the best example for to write for the children. Another important aspect of the children's short stories is that there shouldn't be very difficult or complex words. In place of very complex words, like we say elucidated, so there's no need to say elucidated. One can say clear it, write simply, like that. And if somebody says he is gone to his heavenly abode, so what is it? Children will not understand what is heavenly abode. Simply he or she died, like that. Children love to be spoken directly about happenings. Sometimes we say some child loses his or her guardians. We say no, they have gone to the God's house. We cannot explain that they have gone there, this, that, and so forth. So we cannot, weave a long story. So instead of we say no, the God has, because they were very good people. So God has taken them to His abode. So that is one such example, that using simple words in simple accent, local accent, the stories will definitely flourish amongst the children. Another point which is to be kept with regard to the language of the short stories for children is the avoiding cliches. So we shouldn't, I mean, the author shouldn't use cliches, very complex phrases, and like that. So there should be direct, like somebody say sleeping like a dog. Huh? Somebody says like it is a disastrously cowardly act. So one should say either it is a fearful act or act with fear. Somebody can say, if one say down the memory lane, what it means. Down the memory lane. Somebody say in the past. Somebody say nears and dears. So we shouldn't say near our relatives like that. So we shouldn't use a lot of cliches. There is no place for the cliches because the children do not think in a complex manner. They think plainly and directly. So there should be direct talk in the short stories through the narratives which children understand and appreciates. And finally, with regard to the appropriateness of themes, it is very important that the importance of the illustrations, cartoons, etc., is given due consideration in children's books. For children, particularly children in the age group of 2 to 3 or 4 to 6, love pictures. They love to see animals. They love to see moon. They love to see flowers. They love to see the animals, the birds, and they love to see the sun smiling, and giving warmth and through the bright rays. So if we want to describe the sun, we can put the we can take the paper sheet, and in its eastern side, the sun's, the illustration can be made, which is very bright, which is sparkling, and then in between we can put in some dots, which represents the sun as a deity as well as a form, just like children. So children would like to see, they would like to touch moon, they would like to touch sun, they would like to speak to sun, speak to moon, speak to animal, speak to tree, speak to sparrow. So they'll say, uh, little sparrow, come to me, have a grain, like to eat, like this. So, what is in it? So, if there is a small sparrow, sitting on the branch of a tree, then the children will be automatically attracted to it. So, the illustration must also be given due consideration. Those are very important tools for the for conveying certain themes to children and entertain them. Uh, well, writing for children is definitely a complex task. So different agencies have been working on it. Uh, there has been certain important innovations in the children's literature, specifically in the In USSR, there has been a lot of literature which has been created. Of course, the literature has a background to it, but on the face, it is good to see the innovations made in the children's literature. In India, the National Book Trust is making a lot of efforts. The film industry is making a very important contribution through the Children's Film Society of India, and Government of India's division, which is films division. It is also producing a lot of big films on the children. So we are not talking about the films actually essentially, but as a story writer for children, one has to write a story for children, which might be developed into a film. So how that should be written, that we are discussing. So in order to make a good short story, a good script for the children's short story, one has to keep the issues in mind, like the very first issue, which is the appropriate theme, how the theme should be selected, how it should be developed, what are the criteria for it, what are the consideration for any theme which is to be considered for children. So these were some issues, some points which we discuss right now. Now we'll go to next point, for the children's writing children's short stories. What is the next part? That is the that part is very important. And if we look into children's literature, then there is nothing but one very important aspect. While it is in short stories for general reading, we have the fiction, which is developed as a fiction. In children's literature, we have fantasy. So, what is fantasy? Uh, Fantasy is something which sounds unreal to us, but as a matter of fact, it remains very much there. So we all know, if we talk about fantasy, we know fantasy is basically the world of fancy. What is world of fancy? World of fancy is the world in which there are a lot of such happenings, such incidents which are appealing to the children. So if you look at the plot which is considered for writing for the children, and we see there are a lot of characters which are not real, which are just very unreal. So if we look at those characters, a lot of messages, lot of issues are with them. So it is very important that due consideration is given to the world of fantasy, because that is the one area which is loved by children. So as I said, fantasy is something which is the world of fantasy. So what is the world of fantasy, or how do children react to the world of fantasy? You see, children would like to get into that world and become part of it. They would like to play, a role in it. They would like to be part of it. They would like to enjoy that. Then they would like to mingle with the character. So if that can be done, then that means that the writing is very successful. If a child is involved into the acts, which is the world of fantasy, where unreal people, where creative, where imaginative characters are roaming, where imaginative happenings, things are happening. There are imaginative encounters, adventures, and but at the same time, maybe one or two characters are also from the real world. So one has to work upon all these aspects very deeply, very considerably. There has been a lot of fan- fancy, or the fantasy full stories in our mythical literature. If you look at the characters in the Panchtantra, in the Katha Sagar, in the Hitopadesh, some characters in Ramayana, in the Mahabharata also, there are a lot of characters which are very much real, yet the character is developed entirely in the imaginative world. We have people who have been flying around, we have things which have been moving here and there, and all sorts of things are there. So if you look at our folklore literature and the fairy tales, particularly the Katha Saga, there are thousands of stories. So there are people who are very simple. There are people who are very wise. There are giant people. There are ogres. There are magicians. A whole lot of people. There are old ladies who have some bag in their hands. They can create a lot of creatures from that. All these imaginative stories are basically very much appealing to the children. So these are the world of fantasies, and in children's short stories, these have a greater role to play. Similarly, there are different forms of fantasy. There are fairy tales. There are characters. There are simple-minded people. There are ugly-looking people. There are old people with bags. They are carrying them, and then they can produce whole lot of imaginary world of creatures from their bags. So, but in the recent times, like we have Gulliver's Travels, Arabian Nights, we have Alice in Wonderland, and the Wizard of Oz. Like that, new fantasy stories are also coming. So there's a traditional lot of stories in which a lot of fantasy, but there are short stories for children which are coming into the modern age as well. So today, particularly, the people are also talking about good for nothing prince, the emperor's guide, the seventh Mandalorian, and practical princess, etc. These are new modern world's fantasies. So put together, the old fantasies are also very much appealing. They are becoming part of the global children's literature. So a very important contribution in the contemporary fantasy is the Jungle Book. So there are a lot of stories. It is based on the stories of Rudyard Kipling. He's created a world of attractive stories which are based on the jungles and the beasts, animals which are living in the jungle. So Jungle Book has become very, very popular amongst the children. So these are the modern days fairy tales, the fantasy tales. It is very important, for the writer who is writing about the fantasy. The problem with writing the fantasy aspect in the short stories about children is to create an environment, kind of atmosphere which is believable. You see, the look at the Rudyard Kipling's Jungle Book. The short stories are based on the jungle and the beasts residing in jungle. The children, believe them because their imagination is not beyond the reality. You see, it is in quest of certain amount of reality in it. So similarly, if we look at the other creations like Alice in the Wonderland, you see the character of Alice in that kind of situations, which is otherwise very unreal. The children, there is some agreement into the character and the settings, or rather, I should use the word the environment. You know, within which the character gets fully established. So there, the character does not look unreal to the world, and the happenings that takes place are in consonance with the one should say with the feeling or the happenings that are possibly likely to take place in that particular environment, that particular uh, situation. So that situation demands a certain type of behavior from the character. So if that matches the expectations of the situation and the character which is performed by different maybe animals, maybe the birds, maybe by the tree or anything else, then there is an amount of believability in it. So means it should be believable. That is one. Secondly, howsoever funny may be, it, or whatever Humpy Dumpy there may be in it, but it should be believable. Another important aspect of a fantasy, particularly in children's short story, is the logical framework. Logical framework is not something very logical, very argumentative from practical point of view, as the elders will try to look. But for children also, if they have characters like a big elephant and a small elephant, then they don't expect that the small elephant runs faster than the bigger elephants. What they would like to is that it is rumbling under the 4 feet of big elephant, and it is trying to sneak here and there, and the big elephant is controlling it. Children love that tending. Children, they would like to feel, safe, because the children feel safe in the elders' company. How do that company? How do that company works in the animal world? So in the animal world also, the company will work framework. It has to be acceptable. Am I not audible?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
So, am I now audible?
Yes, sir, we
Yes, sir.
can
We
hear
can.
you.
Okay,
We
I'm
can.
sorry.
Thank
There
you.
was a huge lightning, and it simply tore away the internet connectivity.
Sorry.
It took a while for the restoration.
Okay.
So, I was talking about two very important aspects which are there in the treatment of fantasy. As I mentioned to you, that it is very important that howsoever great the fantasy is there, fantasy we now understand it is a fancy world, it is an unreal world. There are people, there are characters, there are other things that those may not be seemingly true, but sometimes they are real characters also. But at the same time, you see, the children's mind also thinks in a very different way. While they would like to go for characters, for happenings which are entirely imaginative, they would like to have an element of truth and an element of honesty to which they can entertain to, and then they can believe in that. So the exaggeration, you see, can be there, but it cannot be unreal. That is very important. Another aspect I mentioned to you is the logical framework. What is logical framework? It's not analytical framework. I think we must distinguish between the two. Analytical framework is the characteristics of the adult mind. Particularly looking at the contrasts and then comparing and distinguishing between the two, and bringing in about the common and distinct features of happening a thing. Children do not think like that. What they do think is they would like to set the things in a situation where situation demands certain actions from the character. So if there is a sync between the two, if there is an understanding between the two, and the expected behavior is there from the character, the children love to do that. So that is the logical framework of the children's mind that has to be there. So, as I given one small example, like how do the children love the company of elders, and they do feel safe in that. How do they feel safe in that? Children would like either to walk ahead of an elder, or maybe parallelly by holding a finger or hand, or maybe behind but chattering, murmuring something like that, so that they know that there is an elder, there is assurance. So I gave you an example like small elephant who rumbles here and there, who tries to sneak in out of the herd. Then the big elephant, mother elephant, would bring that young elephant into the middle of the herd, and then that would walk between the legs of that big creature. So the small elephant will yet try to sneak here and there, do mischiefs, but then also feel safe in that huge beast's aura. So that is there. That kind of feeling is there with the children. So they love to read the stories that have that kind of environment with them. I have already mentioned to you how to introduce value into children's writing. Children do are very soft, very kind-hearted. They are very virtuous. They do not like to read, like to see, which is which is very cruel, which is very unkind, like that. So, if that kind of situation is presented to children, then they do feel very sad about it. So that means a sense of passion is created in their very hearts. So we cannot make things too obvious. We cannot give a very explicit message, but within the characters, within the happenings, such episodes can be built which implicitly convey something. Even if there is small commotion, children do not want to be there. they will feel frightened. So then they get the message that, oh, this creation of violence is the act of bad people. So then say, no, you are bad, you are bad. They would even tell their parents if they quarrel too much, and if their ugly behavior from them, children will not accept even the mother and father and brother and sisters also. They will say, no, you are bad. Sometimes we have seen the children speaking in the face of the parents or the grandparents, no, you are not good, you are bad. So that kind of, so because that sounds that they do not like to the violence, they do not like uh, happenings which are against humanity, those are cruel, those are not having love and affection. So they love they love kindness, they love to show, to treat animals equally, like that. Some children are very natural, they share their food with the birds. They take it and put it to the birds, to will feed the dog from their own plate or from their own tumbler. So why? So that means if that kind of story is built, like small child is feeding the animals, feeding the birds, then the other children will get a message. Oh, these are also living beings. We love to see them, so we should also share our food. So it is the value of sharing is imbibed in children through such writing. So, so what I'm trying to say, the virtues have to be put in some kind of higher plane before the children, but not explicitly, rather implicitly, not very obviously, but through the actions, through the narratives, through the events that unfolds in the short story written for children. It is very important to see that we are very careful about creating racial biases amongst the children through our writing. So in the writing, it is very important that the use of words, use of the presentation of happenings, their descriptions, should be such that it shouldn't be discriminating between this and that. Rather, it should be encompassing. It should be encouraging the inclusiveness. Where every child is equal. All the creatures deserve love, and they we must share with them. So we shouldn't create biases that, oh yes, this is girl, this is boy, this toy belongs to boy, this girl. Though the children themselves will choose the toys also. So nowadays, even this is very strictly adhered to by the manufacturers, that they do not categorize the toys by the sex. So all this is happening into creating environment where the happenings, where the objects are not against, they're not are creating a bias on the different parameters. Finally, I think it is very important that while writing for children, even though we understand it is a writing full of fantasy, that means it is not real world writing, yet there has to be an element of truth, element of truism in it. It should be believable. It shouldn't create biases, and also, you know, it should suggest, it should try to imbibe a sense of love, compassion, the sharing, and all the respect for any living beings. So that is very important. I think a young author, young writer should keep all these points in mind while dealing with the children literature. So the fantasy point is very important. Another issue which is there, which is also equally important, is the narratives. How the narratives of the children's literature are different. So we all know narratives are a very important and central part to any story. There is a plot, and then it moves through the narratives which the different characters make. So one has to be very, clear about how the narratives should be there, whether they should be open-ended or they should be closed-ended. So the open-ended narratives are preferred for children's writing. Reason being, they allow children to involve, to think imaginatively, to think beyond the conventions, beyond the point, and they expect a lot of things to unfold before them. If we offer them very closed-ended narratives, then the children do not have scope to move in their fancy beyond a point. But the point to be kept in mind that the children shouldn't also be taken into a world which is highly, which is which is unrealistic in its entirety. There has to be certain amount of reality in their imagination, some message. So there's a challenge between the open-ended narratives and the closed-ended narratives. So we have normally, if we look at the Ramayana and Mahabharata, you see how do they move ahead. So they present a very typical type of narratives. There are different characters. The different characters are performing different roles. Then they are making different statements. The statements themselves carry the main theme forward. So this is very important, and a story actually is a sequence of events, and put together it becomes a story. Story even literally means the different segments, different episodes put together. So they make one chain of segments, chain of events, then they become one story. And it is having a space for characters, for setting, and for description. Now these three things are very important: characters, settings, and descriptions. So when we have characters, the sequence of events which is making a story. So if somebody say what is story? Story, that is what is narrated. But what is narrated? Sequence of events. How does it become story? When there are a lot of sequence of events, it is one story. So if we in the normal conversation we say, no, what is the latest story? So that doesn't mean only one episode. We are eager to know what happened, what happened in this particular case. So we listen from the other person. This happened, then that happened, then that happened, and so forth. So that means there is a sequence of events. This sequence of events ultimately makes one story. So the story is consisting of characters, setting, and description. We all know, we have already spoken about settings. What is setting? Setting is the situation, setting is the environment, setting is the kind of situation. It is a kind of atmosphere in which events takes place. If we are talking about Jungle Book, where the events are taking place? Jungle. What is jungle? Jungle is full of trees, full of wild animals, full of flowers, water cascades, any number of things which are there in the wild. Those are settings. Those are environments. Those are the situations. Third is description. There is a setting, there are characters, but if there are no descriptions, then why we have characters? No, we don't have any purpose. So that simply means when there are characters, when there is a story, there is sequence of events. When there is a sequence of events, there are characters. When there are characters, there will be setting, there will be environment, there will be atmosphere. Then what will happen? There will be description. What is description? Description is the detailed account of all those settings. Who will be doing that? Presenting the account? Characters. Now, if there is atmosphere, if there are characters, if they are talking to each other, what is that talking? That is the narrative. That the narratives makes the setting live and bring in life into characters. Here we come to the point that is under discussion, which is the narrative. What kind of narratives? If in a short story, say, when did you come from X place? Yesterday. This is close-ended narrative. If somebody says, it is how long that you came here and how did you come, then there will be an open-ended narrative. Somebody will say, I came here yesterday, I came on my own vehicle, I took help from somebody else, I came on horse. All sorts of expectations are there. So when there are a yes or no answer, or there are very constrained scope for answering, it is closed-ended narrative. When there is a scope for description, it is open-ended narratives. So the relationship between narrative, between story and the plot, in fact, we can take it in the reverse order also. Like first there is a plot, then upon the plot, story is conceived, built, and story moves ahead with the help of narratives, which is done by the characters. We can use narratives to discuss a lot of social events, social taboos, and many other things. You see, the open-ended story is rather more apt for the children because as I just now mentioned to you, that children have a craving. The children have a craving for knowing the unknown. So knowing the unknown will happen through what kind of sense? That sense is what happens next. If it is closed-ended, that sense will not be prevailing there. So the author should skillfully utilize the situation, rather if we say the settings, and then use the characters skillfully and makes the narratives, and through the narratives there will be cravings for knowing the next, what happens next. So this what happens next is the result of open-ended story. So why open-ended story? Important. It is important to sustain the interest of the reader. Who is our reader here? The child or the children. So we have to sustain the interests of the children. Then we have to have certain techniques in our narratives which keeps the interest alive through craving of what happens next. So this what happens next is of many kind. What It can be situational. Situational means the situation, or just now we use the word settings. The settings in which the events are being unfolded, suddenly, and then he brought a very fairy queen to his palace. This brings into another character, another situation. What situation? The new queen. How the new queen would be, that is the inquisitivity. How would she behave with the children already in the palace? That is the inquisitivity. Or if we talk about about the Jungle Book, there are different characters, there are different animals, there are children, there are trees, there are birds. So then someone's, and then suddenly the sky was covered by a huge shade, and there appeared a giant bird on the ground. So what that giant bird would be like? It is imaginative. It would be quite huge. Then it would either become friend. How would that behave with the rest of the birds? How would that be received by the world of animals? How would the children look at that new bird, and like that? So there is anxiety, there is inquisitivity, there is craving to know what happens next. So it creates a kind of thrills in the heart of the children. So then they come through various situations like this they had not seen so far. The character is not very familiar with them. Then they would be a little afraid of that, how that would mingle with them. So a lot of complex feelings are there in the children. Children love to do that, and then ultimately they would make a move and become friendly with that character. So all this is the interest sustaining elements of children's story. So if we go through the important short stories, written by very acclaimed authors, then we can find, like if you see Murkraj Anand's story. So the child has been described through various mental stages, but ultimately the child comes to a point where he insists, no, I would like to go to my home. So that home feeling is there. Children's mind cannot be read. It has to be given different situations, and within those different situations, different characters make their contribution, and the story moves ahead. Then another one is the situational kind of open-ended narrative style. Then there can be another open-ended narrative style, which is character-based. So the character-based style is that like very important example is the Panishwanath Renu's Mela Anchal. There you see the different characters have different regional character in them. They are little dummy, they are little intelligent, they are little conversational, they are using the local language, they speak in they also carry the locales with them, they represent through their attire a particular regional locales. So all this goes with the character. So if a character is put in a very prototype attire, then there is no scope. But if somebody is having like regional attire, then one can be interpreted, one can be taken into for different situation. So if you look at Renu's Mela Anchal, then we have two, three very important, particularly the cartman who is plowing the oxes and then taking the hero taking the lead character in his cart. Then he's also a good singer. He has a number of other characteristics where he is a very good narrator of the local tales, like that. So this way we can bring in multifarious qualities or approaches. The children can look many things from one particular character. If we look at the Louis Burgoy's The Garden of Walking Paths, so there it is very difficult otherwise to look many facets of one simple person. But the children fantasize, they look at the character and expect a lot of things from one character. So this expecting many things from one character is the open-ended character. So it is in terms of narratives which are made by the character, but having a multifarious personality. So this is one important aspects that open-ended narratives can be either situational. Within one situation, there is a scope for bringing into different understandings, and sometimes it is with the characters. Also, one character makes one statement, but it has number of inherent meanings in it. So those cannot be stated very clearly. Those can be only imagined that yes, this particular character can perform this way, that way, and so forth. So the open-ended characters and the closed characters, where we don't have scope to interpret the character, and the situation where the character can be situation can be interpreted in a number of ways. That is the situational or the character-based open-ended narratives. But one important aspect of the open-ended narratives is that there is a lack of clear-cut ending. There is no clear-cut ending. The character can go on performing any number of tasks, any number of actions can be there with the character. So it is a kind of play of the character or the play of the situation. Situations can have number of dimensions to it, or the character can have number of dimensions in terms of narratives to it. There is no definitive ending that follows either with the situation or with the character. Last point that I would like to share with you with regard to the this particular discussion, that is about the language and illustration about the short stories for children.
Not audible, sir.
Are you getting my voice?
Not clear, sir.
Are you able to get my voice?
Yes, sir. Now we can hear you.
Okay, sir. So actually, there is a very freak signal, but the last point, which I hope I'm able to conclude it today. Otherwise, we will take it tomorrow. That is about the very important aspect is the language. So the language and illustration, these are two very important aspects of the children's writing. And within this language, the first part is language, second is illustrations. In the beginning itself, I discussed why illustrations are very important for children's writing. Reason being that children love to see cartoons, the depictions of different characters through cartoons, through illustrations, through maps, through the pictures and so forth. So they make very interesting reading, particularly the young children of age 2 to 3 or 4 to 6. This is very important device for conveying the things. As far as the language is concerned, this is definitely a very big concern for the children's writers. First of all, there has to be very considerate decision about choice of words. As I mentioned, that children do not want to go through the complex words. They want simple words. They do not want the jargons. They don't like the use of cliches, the complex phrases, etc. They don't want to read or hear a lot of idioms or phrases. They want simple and direct expression. So, first of all, it is very important that we use simple words, not use the complex and very difficult words. Yes, of course, sometimes there is need to introduce, particularly for children from 8 to 12 or 12 to 16. Definitely, they are in the growing minds, and new words should be introduced to them through the short stories. I mean, that is one method to introduce the new words. How can we introduce those new words? Like if we say resounding, you know. So the child might ask, what is the resounding? So we can say sound which is coming back. So he say, what do you mean by sound which is coming back? Then we can say, oh yes, when you hear tabla or harmonium or percussion or something like it, then you hear one sound. Then when in a little while there is another sound. So he says how it is coming. So you can say sound goes to the wall, comes back, then it resounds. So like that, within a set of sentences, you can clear that concept. But the concept or the new word should be such that it is understandable in the environment of the child or the children. Very important point is that we should use fresh images to the children. That means in children's writing, new characters must be introduced. So if we are talking about theft, about thief, about dishonest person, then there is need to bring in some character which is a situation which can be built in children's mind that yes, if there are bad people, if there are bad acts, bad actions, then how those actions can be controlled. Am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So now,
Yes.
what very intelligently the author can do, he can bring in police. Then child may ask, what is police? Then he can say, well, if some people are not good people, if they give pain, if they are not good to others, then they should be controlled. So who will control them? A mighty people. Who is mighty people? Police. But it is very important that we not create negative perceptions about any individual, any organization, or any such group of people, those who are there in the society. Even the negative peoples are there in the society. It is a duty of the budding author or negativity.
Sir, we can't hear you.
I believe sir is having some connectivity issues.
Think so because he was saying that the weather is bad there.
Yeah,
Possible.
could be, yeah.
Uh, am I able to put my audio through?
Yes,
Yes,
we
sir, you are audible and seen.
Okay, extremely sorry. You see, we were talking about the language of the children's writing. It is very important that the due consideration is given to the choice of words for the children's writing, and also, as I mentioned to you, that the bad image should not be created about any individual, about group, or about an institution in the minds of the children through the children's writing. This is very important. And though we know we have seen quite often in our literature that a kind of typical image is created about certain organizations, about certain people, whether it is through making fun of those characters or likewise. But as far as possible, it should be avoided and one shouldn't get into it. Similarly, as I mentioned, that there is need to introduce new words that can be done by using difficult or new words, and then go on, explaining them by creating a situation or by creating a series of dialogues. What is important is that we use appropriate words. So, because we know that there are a lot of concepts, lot of new ideas that are to be built in the literature for children, be it poems, be it poetry, or be it fiction or fantasies, whatever it is. But definitely a new knowledge has to be incorporated into it and provided to the children. So, uh, what I'm trying to say is that it should have an element of appropriateness. What is appropriateness? Particularly, we know that with regard to the concepts, often we juggle around the series of words, and then we do not come to an end where an appropriate term has been coined to explain certain typical type of situation, particularly with the conceptual words. Say, for example, we use the word ring, ring, R-I-N-G. So it has number of meanings. So how do we explain what do I mean? So if whether it is a group of bad people, or it is a ring to be worn in the finger, or it is a ring to be put around something. So it has to be made very clear as to what the context is and in which context this particular word is being used. So we cannot say like you put a round about things. We say yes, put a ring around couple of rods. So that means you bind them together. So the concept ring means to bring in things into a particular group and then bind them together. So this is very important that we attach appropriateness to the words. They are very appropriate to this situation. Otherwise we can juggle around. Oh yes, you put a lot of things together, then bind them, then do them. But how do you do them? You simply say put a ring around. So introduce this word. I've already mentioned how to introduce difficult words and concepts. And sometimes it is, I mentioned to you that there is a need to build in new imagery or fresh imagery. Means we should bring in out the children from the prototype thinking. So what is prototype thinking? Means putting things in a fashioned way that has already been there. So the children love to be out of the box. They love things which are out of the box. What is out of box thinking is that there can be new dimensions to it. Like somebody says cold as ice. Then but we have never heard a phrase cool as cucumber. Cucumber is known to be soft, but we can say it. Oh, it seems it sounds very cool. What sounds? Cucumber, because it is green. So newness is in the sense that a green thing can be cool. It is cool. We know green is cool. But cucumber we didn't introduce earlier to be a cool object, to be a cool commodity, something like it. So we should give the children new imageries, new things to build in their minds from the conversation. Uh, Sometimes we try to use, we say it is a golden sunset. What is golden sunset? Children are not very interested in understanding what is golden sunset. They have very, they know only the sun is going away. Tomorrow the sun is now saying goodbye. So instead saying golden sunset, we can say beautiful sunset. Sun is saying goodbye to us, like that. So sometimes we say pale as moon, pale as moon. What does it mean?
Not audible, sir.
Oh, sorry, I think there is a break again. Uh, are you getting my voice now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I have come outside the house just to catch some glimpse of. Are you getting my voice?
Yes, sir. Slightly broken, but still we can make out.
Okay. So I would just now like to, tell you that perhaps situation is getting little worse due to the clouds and thundering and lot of rains. We will conclude it tomorrow. So we'll take a break for today and meet tomorrow. Okay.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Okay. Thank
Okay,
you
sir.
very
Thank you.
much. We'll conclude it, right? Thanks a lot. And sorry for the botheration.
It's okay. It's okay. Beyond your control, we can understand that.
Yeah,
And
you
it's
can
been
see
raining very
the.
badly in Kerala also last week, whole of last week,
Oh,
and just 2 days now we are
you can
seeing the
see
sun.
around here, around the place.
Yeah, yeah.
It is raining
Just
very heavily for the last almost 50 to 60 hours non-stop. Okay, we'll meet tomorrow.
okay, sir. Have a
Okay.
good day. Bye.